My name is Arshvi Shah, and I'm from the initiative Youth for Juvenile Justice Reform. Today I'll be talking about the school-to-prison pipeline. This video explains what the school-to-prison pipeline is and goes over the extremely detrimental effects it has on the underprivileged and impoverished youth of America. At the end, I will also talk about a few alternate approaches to the pipeline so we can create an environment that encourages growth and rehabilitation for at-risk youth. So, what is the school-to-prison pipeline? The phrase was coined to explain the discriminatory practice of criminalizing children, mostly of color, that come from predominantly underprivileged and overpoliced communities. By implementing zero-tolerance policies and opting to rely on the police to enforce rules and maintain discipline instead of teachers and counselors who have been trained to be good mentors for the youth, schools actively contribute to the increased number of children in prisons. These kids are promptly forced to fend for themselves in the corrupt institution that we call the American juvenile justice system. Some important factors that have contributed to the school-to-prison pipeline are zero-tolerance policies, racial discrimination, socioeconomic inequality, and police involvement. Of course, the pipeline isn't defined by just these aspects alone, and there are definitely a lot more ways in which the society contributes to the practice of turning kids into criminals, but these ones are pretty important and a lot more damaging than people might think. I'll go into more depth about each of these topics in the next few slides. Zero tolerance. According to the National Clearinghouse on Supportive School Discipline, or NCSSD, zero-tolerance policies mandate predetermined consequences, most of them being extremely unreasonable and severe in response to certain misbehaviors. Why is this bad? As the ACLU published in their examination of school-to-prison pipelines, students that have been suspended or expelled as a result of zero-tolerance policies are almost 3 times more likely to be involved with the juvenile justice system in the future. Schools with these policies in place refuse to take into account the context or the student's justification for their behavior, which leads to them being wrongfully punished for minor misdemeanors. This can change the entire trajectory of these kids' lives. Children with behavioral issues shouldn't be criminalized for trivial offenses. Since the most common consequence dealt to these kids is either out-of-school suspension or expulsion, many of these kids lose educational opportunities, and a lot of them never even end up graduating. Now moving on to racial discrimination. The ACLU has said that in the same public schools, Black students are 3 times more likely to be suspended or expelled and 2 times less likely to graduate than their white peers. As you can see in this bar graph, there is a disproportionate amount of Black and Hispanic students being suspended for similar offenses as their white peers between 2004 and 2012. A 2018 study done on juvenile incarceration found that 31% of students experiencing school-based arrests are African American, even though African American children and youth make up only 16% of total school enrollment. Here's another graph showing the imbalance between suspensions of Black and white students. It shows that African American girls are 6 times more likely than white girls to get suspended. Now we'll talk about socioeconomic inequality. As defined by the organization Each Other, socioeconomic inequality refers to disparities that individuals might have in both their economic and social resources that are linked to their social class. These disparities include, but aren't limited to, their earnings, education, and/or income. The chart on the right shows that people with lower socioeconomic status are less likely to attain a higher education. This directly correlates to the vicious cycle of poverty, as impoverished people have less opportunities to graduate high school and pursue a higher education. They are subsequently kept in the cycle and are rarely ever able to lift themselves out of it. Underprivileged youth living in impoverished areas are also more exposed to crime, as the areas they are living in are overpoliced, leading to higher rates of crime and arrests than higher income areas. Lastly, we'll talk about police involvement in schools. Black and Latinx students are arrested at higher rates for the same misdemeanors, and many corrupt officers abuse their powers as resource officers and have personal agendas against the Black and brown community. After schools started relying more on the police and placing resource officers on campus, we have seen an alarming increase in the number of incarcerated peoples. Currently, the U.S. has the highest number of incarcerated individuals in the world, a large portion of them having come directly from the school-to-prison pipeline. Ways to combat the school-to-prison pipeline. Hiring counselors. 14 million students are currently in school with police, but no counselors, psychologists, nurses, or social workers. The U.S. Department of Education recommends a student-to-counselor ratio of 250 students to 1 counselor. However, the national average is almost double that at around 444 students to 1 counselor. Black and brown students have reported feeling intimidated by their school's resource officers and said they would much rather have more funding being directed towards getting more counselors for their school. Pointing students towards counselors and letting them explain their actions has proven to be much more effective in terms of ensuring the same offense doesn't happen again. Counselors also have much more training and deal with kids in a much safer and healthier way than resource officers do. Another solution could be getting rid of zero-tolerance policies. Abolishing zero-tolerance policies might seem like an impossible task considering how many school districts have them in place, but pushing for alternative discipline policies like teaching students how to resolve conflicts non-violently, peer-to-peer counseling, positive behavior incentives, and community service, where the context and circumstance of the misbehaviors are taken into account, can greatly contribute towards dismantling the school-to-prison pipeline. Thank you so much for watching, guys. Youth for Juvenile Justice Reform was founded in 2019 as an initiative to push for the reform of the American juvenile justice system. Started for youths by youths, we are dedicated to bringing justice to victims of the juvenile system and strongly encourage you to join us on our mission. Our handle on Instagram is @YouthForJJReform on Instagram. Thank you so much.